Hi there, and we are glad that you decided to join us today on Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet, and whatever else comes along, but that's probably in the unexpected part. I want to really thank you for being here. Really glad that you're with us and hoping that you're having a good day. Our guest today, my colleague in crime and conversation today is Kevin Lowe, and I was on a podcast that Kevin did, and I told him that the cost for me being on his podcast was that he had to come on Unstoppable Mindset, and he bought into that. So we suckered him. So, what more can you ask for? Kevin, welcome. How are you?
I am glad to be here, man. I'm glad to be here. And to be honest, for a minute, I thought, oh my gosh, I have to cancel this interview right away. But then I thought, no, I guess I can afford the cost of having to be on your show as well, So.
You'll suffer through it, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Well, we're really glad that you're here, and it's always fun. And I understand that where you are down in Florida, you're having typical summer Florida sunshine.
Yeah.
Like California Florida sunshine, right?
Yeah, sunshine with a mix of thunderstorms. So yes.
It never rains in Southern California or Florida. Yeah. But here we are. Well, let's start the way I love to start. Tell us a little bit about you growing up, what life was like, and just all about Kevin, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So, I really had a really blessed childhood, honestly. I grew up, I'm born and raised here in Ormond Beach, Florida, which for those who are a little bit more familiar with Daytona Beach, Florida, which is about an hour east of Orlando. Grew up right here in this little beachside town, and had a great childhood. Grew up riding dirt bikes and four-wheelers, hunting and fishing and all the things. My biggest love was riding dirt bikes. And literally on my 4th birthday, I got my first dirt bike. And it was so little that it even had training wheels on it. And my parents and stuff, they would get a kick out of it because I'd be riding around the yard and a training wheel would hit an ant pile and I'd topple over,
Ooh.
And but
into the ants, of course.
Yeah. well, of course, but it was really good. And that really, the dirt bike, I don't think they had any clue what that birthday present would do, but really that would become my life for my childhood was riding dirt bikes. It was something I did with my dad. And so we would go camping in the woods for a week at a time, doing nothing but riding every single day. And coming up in my teenage years, when I turned 16, of course, the love for dirt bikes turned to the love of the idea of getting a truck, when I turned 16. And I did indeed. I got it was a Ford, what was it? It was a 96 Ford F-150, 4x4. So it was lifted with big mud tires, and it was literally a 16-year-old boy's dream truck. And fuel economy out the window, practicality, not a bit of it. It was just big, loud, and could go in the mud and have some fun.
Now, the other side of that, of course, is though, with a truck like that and being in high school, did it impress the girls?
Well, of course it impressed the girls. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Yes. Just checking.
Why, of course, and especially when you'd give anybody a ride in the truck, of course, they would get scared to death, because when you're in a truck that high, as you're making turns, they think you're going to topple over, and so it gives everybody a whole lot of fun, But so that was life. Was great. Now I did have some different issues. I started to call them health issues, but we didn't even really know that they were quote unquote health issues. It was just problems I'd had, like headaches. I always had headaches, literally from the time I was a toddler, and they were horrible migraine headaches. Around kindergarten, I think it was, I failed the eye test at school. And so I had to get glasses. And so I started wearing glasses and had the headaches. And And going up through those like middle school years and stuff, my mom would always tell my pediatrician, you don't understand. He drinks more than any human you'll ever see. I mean, I can remember my grandmother, my Nana, she'd pick me up from school. I'd come home and I would down an entire pitcher of tea, and then go on to, glasses of water. Could never drink enough. And all of these were signs of something that we had no idea about. And coming up in my junior year of high school, so now I've been driving for a year. I work at Publix as a bag boy. Things are going good. But here I am, 17 years old, turned 17 about 2 months after the start of school. And yeah, I'm still this little kid. I hadn't started growing. I'm only 5'3", still having these headaches. And finally, my mom and my grandmother had enough. And they're like, listen, something has to be done. And so they got me switched to a new doctor. And that new doctor, he was just another family doctor, but he took one look at me, one look at my chart, and was like, there's something not right. And so that would kind of put forth this kind of just whirlwind of an adventure we would embark on. And that was discovering that I had a brain tumor. And my mom got the call from the endocrinologist on a Friday evening to tell her that the results of the MRI came in and that it was worse than he ever expected, that it was indeed a brain tumor. It was a craniopharyngioma. So thankfully it was non-cancerous, but literally they said that I had 6 months to live if this tumor was not removed. And so it had completely encased my pituitary gland, which your pituitary controls all of your body's hormones. That's why I wasn't growing. That's why I wasn't going through puberty, all of those things. It was also in the crosshairs of my optic nerve and had begun pressing against my carotid artery. And so it was horrible news. It was devastating, but we were assured by the leading pediatric neurosurgeon in the country. We were assured by him that it's no problem. He's like, we're going to go in, we're going to remove the tumor. You'll be back to school in about 3 to 4 weeks, and you'll continue on with life. And, I often joke and say that at that time, the most upsetting part of it was that he told me I would not be able to ride my four-wheeler for 6 months. And so, but life continued. Life was going to continue. And I had fun with it. I named my tumor Bob the tumor. And so we had a going away Bob party with me and my whole family. And
did you have siblings?
I did, a sister.
Okay.
Yep, have a sister. My sister is 5 years older than me. And so I mean, it was really set up to be okay. And I'm back in high school telling all my buddies, haha, see you later, suckers, enjoy trigonometry. I'm out of here, and we go into surgery. It was October 28th of 2003, was surgery day. And I tell people that on that day, my life stopped and a new life began. Nothing went right from that point forward. I had the surgery. The doctor came out, told my family that everything, went great. That the surgery was a success. And it was. I mean, the tumor was removed. It saved my life. But I believe it was maybe the second day or third day after surgery. I'm still in intensive care unit. I have no memory of any time after being wheeled into the operating room. My memory doesn't pick up until months later. So all I know about this time is the stories that have been told by my family. And my mom is the one who always tells the story that she was in the room at this particular moment, and the doctor, the neurosurgeon, had made his rounds, and he's in the room with my mom, and he was talking to me, and apparently I was very combative. And apparently I had one of those pulse ox machines on my toe. Well, apparently I kept ripping the thing off. And so the doctor, he was pointing to the pulse ox machine, and apparently it had a maybe a little blinking red light on it. And he said to me, he's like, Kevin, do you see this light? You don't touch this. Do you see the light? Well, my mom said that I said, no, I don't see anything. And at that moment, he looked at my mom looked at him, and he walked over and he flipped on the light switch, and he started flipping it on and off, on and off. And he's like, Kevin, do you see the light? And I said, no, it's just black. It's just black. And it was at that moment that they found out that I couldn't see. So I came out of that surgery to be left completely blind. So I have no light perception, no shapes or shadows, nothing of the sort. I also lost my ability to smell, had short-term memory loss for, oh gosh, at least a good like 6 months after surgery. And literally just began this whole new life. And for a long time, I thought it was really the blindness that was my greatest disability. Well, I came to realize over the years that it's really more than the blindness. It's the effects that the tumor had on my endocrine system with my pituitary gland. Being now pan-hypopit, where I have to take all these medications to try to replace and do what the body's supposed to do naturally, which is always a very poor alternative. And, it leaves me kind of struggling a lot of the time, but I learned to continue. You learn to adapt, you keep moving forward. And even though things were hard, I kept pushing forward. And I never went back to school the rest of that junior year. Instead, I would have my mom would drop me off at my Nana's house in the morning. She would go on to work, and I had a group of teachers who would come. It was part of a program called Hospital Homebound. And I had Mrs. Scott, who taught me my school subjects. I had Mrs. Davids, who taught me how to read Braille and how to use a talking computer. And then I had Mrs. Toth, who taught me how to start getting around with a cane. And those three women were literally like three angels who entered our lives. And they were amazing. And they were so good with me. Now, luckily, I was really good in school. I was already pretty much set up to graduate. So that made life easier. Especially because, like I said, I had short-term memory loss. So, here I would be learning about school subjects. They would leave, and I'd say to my Nana, when is Miss Scott coming over? and meanwhile, Nana's like, wow, I can tell that just really sank in real well, what we just learned. And but ultimately what happened is through it all, I was able to make it back to school for the start of my senior year. And I just went back for one class a day. We had a block scheduling, so it was 4 classes a day instead of the normal 6 or 7. And so I went back for just one class a day. And the rest I did back at home with those same teachers. Ultimately, I did what I had a goal to do. Now, I hated school. Never liked it, would rather be sick with the flu and get to stay home than go to school. Yet for some reason, from the time I became blind, I kept telling everybody that I just want to be able to graduate with my class. I just want to be able to graduate with my class. And I did it. I literally walked across the stage of my high school graduation. And I think that was a pivotal moment for me. I don't think that I know I didn't realize it at the time. And matter of fact, I didn't realize it till years and years later. I think how impactful that moment was. But for myself, my faith is a big part of my story, and And I believe in all of my heart that God was the one who put that desire to graduate on my heart, and that God wanted to show me that even in this new life, even though things are different, even though things may be difficult, you can still do great things.
I'll bet you got lots of cheers when you walked across that stage.
I did. I did. It was pretty darn awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, because you obviously went through a lot and people were aware of it and sensitive enough to it that when you walked across that stage, it must have been a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool, I must admit. Yeah.
What kind of a grade point average did you have?
I can't remember what I graduated with, but I was always on a roll.
Okay.
I mean, I was always right up there around like the 3.8, GPA. So yeah.
Well, so you graduated, so that must have been what, in like 88?
Oh goodness, no, that was
Not
was
88.
2005.
2005. I miscalculated. Sorry about that, Chief.
How old do you think I am?
That's right. You had the tumor surgery in late 2003. So yeah, okay.
Yes.
Never mind. I was just listening to the story. All right, so you're an old fellow at. So in 85 you graduated, and obviously, well, what happened to the truck?
So my dad kept my truck for a while. I can't remember how long he kept it, and he, it was so unexpected. No one ever expected this to happen. I mean, it wasn't even in the cards, and so I mean, it took a toll on not just me but my whole family, and for a long time I wasn't the only one who kept thinking that this was temporary, that there's going to be a doctor, there's going to be a surgery, a procedure, a medicine, something somewhere in the world that's going to fix me, that I'm going to get my sight back. And my dad, he kept my truck for a while, and he would drive it and pick me up in it, and he always told me that he was keeping it for me. And finally, though, one day I told him, I said, Dad, I said, listen, I said, if the day comes that I can see again, I want a brand new truck. I said, get rid of this thing, sell it, let somebody else get to enjoy it. And I told him, I said, you don't got to keep it for me. Because I told him, I said, trust me, if I get the miraculous recovery that I'm looking for, I'm going down to Ford and getting a brand new one. So
there you go. What did they decide actually happened that caused your blindness? So you had the surgery and they felt it was successful. I would think that they were a little bit surprised that you suddenly couldn't see, or were they?
So yes. So apparently, I guess my optic nerve had already begun to atrophy. And there's a consensus that what happened is when the tumor was removed, that it caused a trauma, shock to the optic nerve. Another thing that I've kind of been told about was that they feel as though the optic nerve had been tunneling blood through the tumor. It had basically become, part of it. And so again, when that tumor was removed, it kind of cut off that blood supply. It caused trauma to the nerve, causing it to atrophy, causing it to die. As I said, go ahead.
Go ahead.
The biggest thing has always just been is I remember in all the after MRIs that I kept having, because when they took the tumor out, there had to be this one little piece left. And so I kept having MRIs afterwards to be sure that wasn't growing back, and it didn't. It continued to die off. And I can remember at every office visit, I'd go into the pediatric endocrinology or the pediatric neurosurgeon's office. And I can remember that man, he always just said he would sit there and he would literally cry with me and my mom. This man who's just at the top of the top in terms of the medical system, this leading pediatric neurosurgeon in the country. And yet he would sit there and cry, and he would say, everything is there. Everything is intact. I see from the result, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to see. And I always told him it was in God's plan. I don't know why either. But I came to realize that for whatever reason, it was in God's plan. And that's what I truly believe.
So you graduated high school, which clearly was also part of God's plan. And then what did you do?
So the years after graduating were a lot of just honestly learning to kind of live again. I tell people that, I was, in an essence, almost I felt like I was brought back down to a child. Here I was, a quote unquote child when it happened, but I had independence. I had my own car, could come and go as I wanted. I could do what I wanted. I was independent. And, I lost that. And again, just the health issues that I was dealing with the surgery and everything, it was a lot. And so a lot of those years after were spent at my Nana's house. Like I said, my mom, my dad, they'd be working and I would stay at Nana's. And while there though, I did some classes. Thank goodness where I live, right near Daytona Beach, we have a huge blind center there. Have a division of blind services, Center for the Visually Impaired, have, I believe, the world's largest Braille book library. All these resources that before this happened, never even knew existed. And so I was so fortunate that, it was so easy for me to go and take classes and get help. And so I started doing some different classes, learning more about technology, doing stuff. I would end up going to our local community college. And that was short-lived. As I said, I wasn't a fan of school to begin with. Now make it a little bit more difficult and have me trying to line up aides to be in class with me as note takers was a total just train wreck. The aides wouldn't show up, or if they did show up, they were talking in class and doing everything other than actually helping me. And so, I would end up having to literally do classes with my family members. Thank goodness I had a cousin my same age who was in college. So I made sure to sign up for some of the same classes she was in so that she could be my aide. And it was crazy. And finally I'd had enough. And so I'm like, okay, I don't think this is the route for me. And excuse me. And so I can't really remember what really much happened like after that, but I just kept trying to live and not really sure what I was going to do. Like I said, it was such a blow because everything that I had ever thought that I might have wanted to do as a career with my life was now no more. Every just bit of me was just torn down. As I tell people, that the only two things that I had were my faith and my family. And literally everything else I felt like was taken from me for a long time. And then finally one day, I got asked to take part in a job readiness program that was offered through the local Center for the Visually Impaired. And it was said that at the end of this job readiness program, they would set you up with an internship at, whatever business that, maybe interested you. So I'm like, okay, I was a little apprehensive, but went ahead and signed up to do it.
What the heck?
So, yeah, exactly. What the heck? Let's give it a shot. So I was in there. To be quite honest, the job readiness program was a little silly. I felt like some of the stuff was a little elementary, but I had a good time because I made friend with two old guys who were in there. One of them, which was a guy from Puerto Rico, I think is where he originally was from, was living here in Florida as a plumber. So we talked all about, handyman stuff. And another guy was in there, was like a former gangster out of New York, and he was a total character. And so the three of us would just kind of sit in the classroom and have a good time together. And at the end of it, though, end of this job readiness program, I had the opportunity to get an internship at a job. And so sitting down with them, trying to figure out what my interests were, I had an interest in travel and radio. And so traveling was something that I did all growing up and loved to travel. And I realized that even after becoming blind, that I still love to travel, maybe even more so because, no longer can I just watch the TV and see the sights. Now I actually have to go places and experience them. And so lo and behold, they set me up with an internship at a local travel agency and an internship at a local AM radio station. And so I began those internships, and oh my gosh, I loved them both. Both at the travel agency, I got to start working, helping the owners of this company. We were booking cruises and working with all their clients, which they specialized in seniors. They had their what was it called? Sensational senior socials. And so it's all these old people coming in, and they were so sweet. And so I was doing that. But at the same time, I'm working at the AM radio station. So I would have to be there from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. I worked on the morning drive, and they didn't really know what to do with me because at first they put me in a little side booth, and I'm on my computer, and I'm supposed to find like local news stories for us to talk about. Well, soon enough, they realized, let's just bring Kevin to the studio. So I literally sat in the studio on the morning drive with the host of the show, the guy Dave, who worked the controls, and then a co-host. And literally, I got to be part of the show. And so, they'd be talking about mostly political issues and stuff. And I always had an opinion on something. And I can remember the host, he'd see me over in the corner, kind of chuckle and laughing. And Kevin, you got some input on this? And, and so I'd pipe in and be on the radio show. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And so
how did they react?
Yeah, it was great. It was great. But into the internship on both places, they went nowhere.
It went nowhere. Before we go on, how was your Braille? So you did learn Braille and so on. How did you and do you do it Braille? Because, you didn't learn it as a very young child.
So I learned Braille really quick, really fast. My teacher even told me that I learned Braille faster than anyone she had ever had. And so I did really good with Braille. But then, of course, if you don't use it, you lose it. And so welcome technology, good or bad, stopped using Braille. And I mean, today I know my grade 1 Braille, but the contracted form, headache. So
okay, just curious.
Yeah, of course.
But you did travel. Well, you were able to get around, and how did you get to the travel agency and to the radio station every day?
Yeah, those were primarily a family member. Generally, it was one of my grandparents, either my grandfather. The radio station was right near his work, and so he would drop me off in the morning, and then my grandma would pick me up, or I would also use transport service. I don't even think we didn't even have Uber and stuff back then, but we had some different
paratransit
services.
And so on.
Yeah. But so those internships ended. And I'm back at square one. I'm like, what the heck do I do? And so I come to find out about this idea of starting a home-based travel agency. And so that's what I did. So January of 2013, I opened my own home-based business. It was called Better Days Travel. And I grew and operated my own home-based travel agency. And I did that up until 2020. And I loved it. Now, I won't say that I felt like it was probably what I was, maybe say, quote unquote, meant to do, but I didn't know what else I was supposed to do. And I knew that I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed getting to, for one thing, get to grow a business. Mm-hmm. I grew up with my parents, both being entrepreneurs, owning their own businesses. And so to have this opportunity to get to be a owner of my own business as well, operating right out of my home, was amazing for me.
What kind of businesses did they have?
So my dad, he had, when I was real young, he had a big, massive construction company with all kind of employees and stuff. He then downsized, had a bearing shop, so sold ball bearings, bolts, all that, the hoses and all kind of different stuff like that. And then he ended up switching over to just operating himself with a bulldozer. So he's a heavy equipment operator. Then my mom had the whole time as I was a teenager, she had her own property management company. And so I grew up with them, like I said, with having their own businesses. And so getting to start my own business was really something that was amazing for me. And I got to build this brand, build this company. And like I said, I really did really well with that, rocking and rolling up until 2020. And, of course, the story has it, 2020 was going to be my best year on record. And then, of course, March of 2020 came, and everything fell apart.
So I'm curious, as a travel agent, so my wife was a travel agent for a number of years. She was a travel agent when we got married. So while you were a travel agent, and I don't know whether it happened as an intern, but certainly once you built your own home business, were you ever able to go on any fam trips and go to look at places?
Yes, okay. I did. Yes. Probably one of the most impactful trips that I've ever been on was one of these trips that you're talking about. And that was with another guy who I had been working with in the travel industry, and he invited me to go with him on a fam trip to Jamaica. And so it was my first time traveling out of the country. I had been on cruises before, but this was my first time like actually flying somewhere out of the country. And it was my first time traveling without a family member with me. And so, but I had a really great relationship with this guy. And so I jumped on the opportunity. And so we went to Jamaica, and oh my gosh, we got to tour the whole island. We went to all the different resorts. The resort we stayed in was absolutely incredible.
Which one?
And we were at, oh my goodness, what is the name of it? Moon Palace.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It was what is it? Yeah, Moon Grand Palace, something like that. So I know that they have a same kind of property over in Mexico. And I think that's called like Moon, and I think the one in Jamaica is maybe called like Moon Grand or something.
My wife took a fam trip to Hedonism, which is I think in Jamaica with couples and sandals and so on. Didn't invite me along, but we did go on some fam trips together. She let me come on a few of them, which was really great. And then we did do cruising. We had she actually won a cruise because she had booked a number of cruises on what was at that time Sitmar, which became part of Princess, but she had some limited options because being in a wheelchair, the early days of, well, I wouldn't say early days of cruising, but back in the 80s and so on, there weren't a lot of accessibility options on ships, and that did change over time. But, we did go even on a ship that was inaccessible. The Fair Sky was a Sitmar ship, and there were like 6-inch sills you had to go over to get into the cabins and so on. But again, since I was with her, then I could wheel her over those and all that.
Yeah.
And then the next ship we were on was, I think, called the Fair Sea, and that one actually had an accessible room, and so that was one of the reasons we got to be on that ship and to do the fam trip on that, because it was totally accessible. It was great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell you, I mean, cruising, I fell in love with cruising, with my family, and then, but it's just traveling in general, experiencing just the world, the people. That's what made me fall in love with Jamaica, was the people. And I'm the person who I remember the day on that trip to Jamaica when we were touring all these different resorts. We were out like all day long. Well, there was a couple of them that I really didn't have any interest in, for one reason or another. And so I had made friends with our driver that day. And so I, told a couple of times, I'm like, hey, I'm just going to sit in here, and me and him, man, we would talk, and I'd learn all about, their culture and how they pressure cook goat and, all this stuff. And that's what then when I would book travel is I tried to get through to my clients was booking travel to experience a destination and not just going to see it. So yeah.
And that was why I asked the question about taking a fam trip, because that way you really had the experience.
Exactly. Absolutely.
So 2020 came, March of 2020 came, and those little things from wherever they came from came along and invaded all of our world.
Yes.
So what happened to you then? What did you do? Because that clearly had an impact on you and what you were doing.
Yes.
Unless you could sell a lot of virtual travel, but anyway.
Exactly. Well, it did indeed. So as I had said, that was going to be my best year on record. And yet inside of 1 week, everything disappeared. All those bookings canceled. And it was at that point, we're all now in lockdown, we're in quarantine, and I didn't know what I was going to do. Of course, none of us did. We didn't know how long it was going to last. We thought it was temporary. And so, luckily I had built, this amazing, community in the travel industry. And so we're just all trying to rally each other together. Well, finally, I decided, this is the perfect opportunity for me to finally start that YouTube channel I'd been thinking about. And so I get my sister together. I'm like, and so start going on Amazon and start ordering equipment to start, being able to film YouTube videos. Well, finally, though, one day it kind of hits me as I'm starting to order stuff and I'm starting to get stuff in the mail. Is I just kind of had that light bulb moment was, Kevin, if Tiffany is not here to help you, you can't do this on your own. You're not going to be good filming yourself, walking around, doing whatever. And so I kind of had that moment like, oh crap, what am I going to do? And my YouTube, stardom, is just been dashed. And so I'm telling my sister about it. And she says, why don't you do a podcast? And I'm like, what is a podcast? And so she tells me, and I'm like, Tiffany, that sounds like a really lame alternative to a YouTube channel. And
little did you know.
Little did I know, I start listening to podcasts. And it didn't take long for me to realize, Kevin, you just found your space, the world of audio, where everybody who listens to a podcast gets to be blind. And so now I'm listening to podcasts about how to start a podcast. And so lo and behold, May of 2020, I launched a podcast. And at
and what
first,
was it called?
It was called The Lowdown on Life and Travel. Because at the time, I still thought that I was going to be a travel agent. And so the podcast was going to talk about me as a blind travel agent and also just focusing on travel, keeping the dream alive for people is what my intention was. And so I kept running with that, and I'm starting to release episodes, and if you go back and you listen to any of your beginning ones now, you cringe like nobody's business, and you think to yourself, how did I ever think that was any good? Yet at the time you thought, man, this is sounding pretty good. Well, I kept getting really good feedback, and as I was going along, I kept getting really great feedback, especially the interviews I was doing. And so 2020 is marching along, and we're coming into, I guess, probably like the fall of 2020. And I'm starting to get people inquiring about travel again. And I didn't know what this podcasting journey was going to do, where it was going to lead. But all I knew was at this moment, I didn't want to book another trip to then have to cancel it. And so I found myself kind of turning people away. And then I realized, you know what? I have to do something different. I don't want to do travel. And so the podcast, I kept having these interviews with people, and I was having these really in-depth interviews. And I think by this point, I had rebranded the podcast for the first time. So it went from the lowdown on life and travel to the lowdown with Kevin Lowe. And I was focusing on just, inspiring stories and personal growth, development, stuff like that. And so I'm having these interviews with people, and I keep having people tell me at the end of our interview that I ask them questions that no one ever asks them, or that I see parts of their story that no one else ever sees before, or all these different little things like that. I even had one lady tell me, she said, the only person who's ever fit those two pieces together before, was my psychiatrist. And I kept having people talk to me about, you should really think about being a coach. Well, again, kind of like podcasting, I had no idea what coaching even was. The only coaching I'd never heard of was the PE coach. And so I start kind of learning about that, and time's marching on. We're now obviously on moving down the months, and I don't even know what year it was. I guess now 2021, I started exploring some different options. Still didn't really know the coaching thing, was doing some different little work with the computer, and not really sure what was happening. And then things finally kind of came together, and I finally realized what I loved, and it was being able to work with people, talk with people, just like I do on the podcast. But now I actually really get to help them, not just interview them. And so it led to me being a transformation coach, which is what I do today.
So tell me a little bit more about what it means to be a transformation coach.
Yeah. So being a transformation, yeah, of course. So the biggest thing with being a transformation coach is working with people who are kind of at that point in their life when they want something more. They want to make a change, but they're scared to do it. They're maybe thinking about what lies on the other side of turning that page, starting a new chapter in life, and they just haven't done it yet. And so I get to work with my clients. They're mostly women who I work with. And, as I say, I help them to create, to embrace, and ultimately step into their next best chapter of life, helping them to transform into this new life that they're wanting, this new just stage of life. And that's what I do as a coach.
And so have you seen some great successes at having done that? Love to learn, more about it, kind of hear some stories if you can about what you've been able to accomplish and so on with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I have had some really great experiences with clients. I developed a coaching program. So I don't just do like, say, one-off sessions or whatever, because I did that at first. And then I realized that it really just doesn't serve the client to work with them one time and then, them go on about life. So I do a 3-month coaching program with each client. And yeah, I've had some great success. As I said, most of my clients, if not, I think all of my clients so far have all been women, all women who are kind of later in life, who are wanting to maybe explore a career change. That's most of them, who they're in this season of life where they've been through some stuff that has kind of opened their eyes, and where they just kind of want more out of life. And so helping them to realize that, to recognize it, and to see what needs to change in their life for them to find that fulfillment. And a lot of times that is a career change, or sometimes it doesn't have to be. It's just adding something to their life that fulfills them. They have their work that, brings in the money and that they enjoy, but now adding on, maybe it's a hobby, or maybe it's starting organization, or taking up a craft, making a side business. Something though that draws on their own experience. And that's the biggest thing, is helping them to really find fulfillment in this kind of new chapter of life that they're creating.
And one of the beauties of doing what you do, I assume, is that you can do it virtually. They don't need to come to where you are.
Exactly.
Which clearly has to help. So what kind of, you're a blind guy, which is great. And so I'll ask this sort of on principle, but what kind of technology do you use? How is technology helping you to do your job better?
Yeah, so I'm a JAWS user. So I
and
have,
for people who don't know, JAWS is what's called a screen reader. It's a piece of software that verbalizes whatever comes across the screen.
Exactly. So I rely on JAWS, which is installed on my just normal Lenovo laptop, and then between that and my iPhone, with VoiceOver, literally, I feel like you can take on the world with those two combined. And so I mean, literally can run my full business right from between my phone and my computer. The entire podcast that I produce, which I have it that goes out twice a week, every week, is literally what used to be a walk-in closet is now a full-blown recording studio. And that's the technology I use. It's funny, after I went blind, I remember getting all different kinds of equipment, stuff that we would order, or stuff that we would get through, blind services, all these different things. Well, now with like the iPhone, oh my gosh, like I just have a couple of apps on my phone and it can do all kinds of stuff. And it blows my mind. Technology as it advances is really, really incredible. How now literally with one app on my phone, I can tell what color my shirt is, or I can, read a barcode off the, can of soup to see what kind of soup it is. I mean, it's really fascinating. And, technology is one of those things that, I was never a big fan of, say, technology, growing up, which, I mean, I think I was blessed in the fact that there really wasn't quote unquote technology when I grew up. But, I never saw myself as somebody who would be so into technology, but becoming blind and with the advancements in technology, it's literally kind of a lifeline, where it makes such a world of difference. And I mean, it's just really awesome.
Well, I love to talk with people about technology. You bring up a very interesting thing. And one of the things that we talk about a lot on this podcast, and that I do with people in general, is that we have such a wrong concept of the term disability, because disability should not anymore mean a lack of ability. Disability is a characteristic. And I think you would probably agree with me if we discuss sighted people that they have a disability too, namely that their disability is light dependence. They got to have light to function.
Yes.
And Thomas Edison invented the electric light bulb in 1879, and that was, as the Americans with Disabilities Act would say, a reasonable accommodation to help light-dependent people be able to see in the dark. Yeah. And the reality is that there is so much technology around lighting and so on, that disability is mostly covered up, but it doesn't change the fact that it's there. And so I try to help people put blindness in perspective, because we don't have that problem. And so we don't worry about that. We use other kinds of technologies, but the fact is we all use technologies to mitigate the disabilities or some of the characteristics that we have. And so it's no different for you than anyone else. And I do love the fact and agree with you that the more you can simplify and not use too many things, the better it is. There are several blind people who I know will talk about going to school and to college in the 80s and well into the 90s and early 2000s, and were Braille readers, but also used technologies for other things. And it was almost like you had to carry at least this big, huge rolling suitcase to carry all the technology around with you. And now, of course, as you said, an iPhone with VoiceOver, which is the screen reader that Apple builds into it, unless you use an Android phone, and then there are a couple of options for that. But the fact is that the technology is going to get simpler, and there are things that we can do that we never thought that we could do before. But the reality is that technology is making that more possible to do.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's what we really want. So we continue to grow with that, and we do what we have to do. So what is your podcast today?
Yeah, so the podcast is called Grit, Grace, and Inspiration. And basically the whole point of the podcast is to be that place of inspiration, of encouragement, of empowerment, trying to remind people that you're not the only one who's going through stuff, that we're all going through stuff, and we can all get through it. And so I get to feature interviews with, as I call them, the real superheroes of the world, the people who are overcoming life's challenges to keep living life. And I just find so much pleasure, so much joy in getting to share their stories with the world. And so I do that. So every week on Tuesday, I release an interview, and then every Thursday I release a solo episode, in which it's just me talking to just you, and most of those are related to a lot of just mindset stuff, or some different tactics to help somebody overcome some problems, or it might be something that was kind of related to that week's interview, something that I wanted to expand on. And so like I said, the podcast is called Grit, Grace, and Inspiration. And I'm getting ready, at the time of this recording, I'm getting ready to release my 200th episode. So
wow, that's pretty exciting. When did you start it?
So this is the same podcast I started back in May of 2020. So it's been 3 years, and it was rebranded twice. So.
But it's 200 from back in 2020.
Yes. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
So do you do all your own behind the scenes work, like editing and all that sort of stuff with it?
No, sir. No, when I started the podcast, the editing thing was something at first that I was trying to figure out. And I kept trying some different, programs. And I'm like, this is so frustrating. I'm not going to do it. And so I went on to Fiverr. Have you ever used Fiverr?
I have.
Okay. So I went on Fiverr and I searched for, podcast editor. I found podcast editor, and I still work with her today. And so as I say that, I record the podcast and then she makes it sound good. So
we got to meet through a company called Amplify You, and Debbie, who's their support person, and they also do podcast work. So I actually work with them. But I started out when we began Unstoppable Mindset. They did the hosting and so on, but I tried to edit the podcasts, and I use a digital audio workstation or editor called Reaper, which actually is very accessible. But as you would attest, it's time consuming, and I decided it really didn't make sense. And so using their services anyway, they did the editing and all that, and it makes it a whole lot better. And so I don't have to worry about it. I do rely on using decent equipment for doing the recording. What kind of microphone do you use?
Yeah, so I use the Rode Procaster.
Ah, okay.
Yep, and then that goes into, I have the interface of the Focusrite Vocaster as my interface, which I mentioned it specifically because I can't remember what the interface I was using before it, because this is a XLR microphone, so can't plug right into the computer. So I have the interface. Well, I have to say that the Focusrite Vocaster is so amazing because it has tactile buttons on the device that are super easy to use, nice tactile knobs, and then its app that installs on your computer works with JAWS. And so I'm able to easily navigate through it and change the different settings, be sure that my mic level is all set, which literally just means like, it's like, hallelujah, it's accessible and it works. And so
Focusrite has gotten more accessible over this past year. They've done a lot of work to improve the interface, which is great.
Yes. So yeah. And like I said, man, the podcasting thing, I just fell in love with it. And I fell in love with it for the simple fact that I'm like, if it wasn't for having a podcast, I never even would have known that all of these amazing people exist in the world.
Yeah.
And I feel like in the world today, we're so inundated with drama, with trauma, with everything we hear is the doom and gloom. And to be quite honest, it's easy to feel like the world is falling apart and there's no hope anymore. And so when you instead get to fill your day by talking to people who are amazing, it just reminds you that there is hope in the world, that everybody is not out to get you, that everybody's not killing one another, that there's some amazing people in this world. And, and I say, when I knew that this was the right thing for me to do was when I kept finding myself being in different interviews, and I kept finding myself just praying and thanking God for putting me in this position. That's when I knew. I'm like, Kevin, I don't know where this path is going to lead, but you're on the right path, so keep following it.
So there are a lot of coaches in the world. What makes you different and a coach that people should relate to and use?
Yeah. So, I think my biggest thing is the fact of, I like to tell people I'm just a human. I'm just a friend. And that's the kind of people who I like to work with, is the people who don't view me as a coach, view me as the best friend who doesn't know you, isn't judging you, is just there for you, to help you, to be your guide. And, I mentioned that, I work primarily with women. Well, a lot of people ask me, well, why is that? And I said, well, I feel like I finally figured out what the purpose was of me growing up with an older sister and a single mom for a lot of the time, and watching nothing but chick flicks and LMN movies and hanging out with all of them, their girlfriends. I'm like, obviously it was for something. And I kind of realized, I'm like, it's because it made me a guy who realizes that I'm able to just work with women better than I am with men. And my style of coaching, I think, just lends its hand better to, working with women, where we're able to just kind of really go deep and figure out the underlying issues of what's going on, what they really want, and, work together to get them to where they want to be.
So do you have a significant other in your life?
I don't. The closest thing I have is my 10-pound sheepoo named Sophia.
Well, that's something to work toward.
Yes. Oh, trust me. Yes. Yes. That would be amazing. Yes.
Well, that too shall come at the appropriate time, I am sure.
Exactly. So.
Well, if people want to reach out to you, would like to talk to you about working with you and so on, how do they do that?
Yeah, the best place to go is my website. That will have all my contact information, and that is literally just gritgraceinspiration.com. And so if you go to that website, gritgraceinspiration.com, there you can check out the podcast, but you can also easily get in touch with me. There's a contact form, find my contact information. So that's probably the easiest place to start.
gritgraceinspiration.com. I will tell you, he is also a great interviewer, and you can tell he is quite a good talker, which is good. So I urge you all to seek Kevin out. I think that there's a lot that he has to offer, and I am so glad that we got to do this today, because there's a lot of life lessons to learn from everything that Kevin has talked about, and talk about having an unstoppable mindset. No question that Kevin has that. Now, we do have to find him a girl, or a woman actually, but that's a process. We'll get there. But definitely, I really appreciate you being here, and I'm glad that we had to do this. And I hope that you listening also enjoyed this. And I would love it and appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening to our podcast. I would also love it and appreciate it if you would reach out to me with any thoughts, or if you happen to know of anyone who might be a good guest for our podcast, Kevin, you as well. You can reach me at michaelhi@accessibe.com. That's MICHAELHI at ACCESSIBE.com, and would love to hear from you. Also, you can go to our podcast page, which is www.michaelhingson, michaelhingson.com/podcast. Or you can just go to the website, michaelhingson.com. Love to hear from you. We have a contact form there. And then, by the way, if you ever need a speaker, and Kevin, if you know anyone who needs a speaker, we do that. Traveling has started to pick up. And so we're back to talking about September 11th and teamwork and trust and other things, and would appreciate any opportunities. So I want to thank you all for considering that. But mostly today, Kevin, I want to thank you one last time for being here. We really appreciate your time and all the insights that you brought us.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.